You shall feel the wrath of Hulkamania.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
Yes, it is. It's another edition of the Brad and John Show. I'm Brad. That's John. John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Brad. How are you?
I have a feeling I know what's going to be in one of your top 3 stories this morning. I have a feeling. But you know what? A lot of times I have the feeling and I'm wrong. But we'll just say what happens this morning. I'm referring to John's top 3. What John does is if you go to johncombest.com, C-O-M-B-E-S-T, every day he puts together, every day for 22 years, hasn't missed one single solitary day. Every day he puts together a list of what he thinks are the top stories around the state of Missouri, politically, governmental-wise, all that kind of stuff. We start the show off in our A block with John's top 3. We bring this guy in. His name is...
I'm Casey Kasem.
And he does this.
Now on with the countdown.
And we start off with...
In third place...
November. Missourians will be voting on ballot initiatives, Brad. We'll be voting on some constitutional amendments. Now, very few surprises were announced by Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft's office in terms of which ballot initiatives had enough signatures to appear on the ballot. There was one surprise, at least in my book, and we'll get to that in a second, Brad. Here's what's not a surprise. Missourians will be voting to legalize abortion, essentially abortion on demand, whenever and however you want it. Sports betting, Brad, which we've covered extensively on this show. Also a minimum wage hike and forced sick leave. So employers have to cover sick leave for their employees. And then also a measure that would ban in the Constitution to ensure that non-citizens cannot vote. It would also ban things like ranked choice voting. So it would have Missouri stick to good old-fashioned winner takes all. Now, Brad, I'll tell you what the surprise was. As a spoiler, what have we talked about 1 or 2 times that might appear on the November ballot that ended up not getting enough signatures? Do you know?
I can't remember. You just ticked off all the things there that, and by the way, that is the thing I thought was going to be in the top 3. I thought it would be like number 1, but it's number 3. I don't know. I'm not sure, John.
Well, we've only talked about it a couple times, but it was a proposal to put a casino at the Lake of the Ozarks.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I do remember that.
Yeah, and it was largely funded by Bally's, and I saw there was a quote from the gentleman who was the spokesman for the group, a guy named Ed Rohde, who I believe was a spokesman for Steve Stenger. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure he was in the Steve Stenger administration here in St. Louis County. But that initiative failed. And to me, what the interesting thing about it is, Brad, is that there was a political action committee that's been formed to oppose that casino. And that PAC is concerned with the rights of Indians because Indians have put in their own proposal with the federal government to get a casino at the Lake of the Ozarks. Now, I didn't know this, Brad, before we started doing research on the gambling issue for Indian casinos. But essentially, if an Indian casino, or an Indian tribe, I should say, gets federal authority, they can put a casino in the state of Missouri, and they're not subjected to Missouri laws. They don't have to pay taxes, I guess, to the state. Like, essentially, they get to keep whatever sharing thing they have with the federal government, whatever auspices are under the federal government, don't apply to the state of Missouri, if that makes sense. So, in other words, Brad, the Indians helped torpedo what I guess you could consider a general paleface casino proposal. So that casino, that main casino, will not be on the November ballot this year. So I think that was really the only surprise as it relates to ballot initiatives.
Well, how did they torpedo it? Because it comes down to just signatures, doesn't it? I mean, what did they?
Yeah,
did they stand out? Brad. Did they stand out in front of the post office, like where all the what do you call it? The petition people would stand. Hey, sir, are you a voter in the state of Missouri? You've been buttonholed like that. I mean, what did they do? Did they go attack those people or put them in the trunk of their car?
I think they ran an information I believe they ran an information campaign that talked about why a casino wasn't necessary. Now, I haven't seen much action in that regard, Brett. I haven't linked to many stories about that. But I think go ahead.
But why wouldn't people sign the petition? That's what I'm saying. How in the world? I mean, in other words, if the whole petition initiative thing is if you go out and hire these people that stand in front of buildings and say, hey, sir, are you a voter? Sign this petition. Okay, how did the Indians circumvent that?
How did they defeat the Bally's proposal is what you're asking?
Yes. How did
I don't know. I don't know, Brad. I think so. To me, just reading the Post-Dispatch piece, which I have up today, it seemed as though the signature gathering group that Bally's hired must have been wildly incompetent.
Okay, but because so in other words, it came down to they didn't get enough. It just came down to they didn't get enough signatures.
And I believe that the Indian group also ran an information campaign about why that casino wouldn't be good for the area.
Well, it's fascinating because we talked about this 2 or 3 weeks ago. The Indian casino operators have become wildly successful, and I believe it's the Seminoles in Florida. Remember we talked about this, that they bought one of the casinos in Las Vegas, and they're renovating it. It's going to be the new Hard Rock Cafe.
Did talk about that. You're right, Brad.
And they talked about that was the interesting thing that they are. Once again, buying a casino. If you were to say, someone would say, here's a square foot of the Strip, how would you like to buy this? And the price is $100,000. You go, $100,000 for a square foot. I'm not saying that's what the property goes for, but you will buy a casino on the Strip in Las Vegas. That ain't cheap. And I don't know if they're going to demolish it and build a new one or whatever, but they started out as a small operation. And now I think they said they're like the third or fourth largest gaming operation in the country. And I believe it's the Seminole Indians. I'll have to look that up again. Because remember we talked about this, that one of the big casinos was going to shut down and it was going to be closed and was going to open up like in a year as the new Hard Rock, which is interesting because that's like the third location of the Hard Rock. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Well, the goofy thing about this is... If I can give you a personal side, and here,
yeah, we can. And Brad, before we get into that, I should also point out too that I just looked up a piece that was also from the Post-Dispatch, and the folks from Bally's said at least a few months ago that whatever effort that the Indian tribe has put in to, I don't know, torpedo, sabotage, I guess we should say tomahawk would be more accurate, to tomahawk the casino proposal has not been effective, and they do not expect the Indian effort to have any negative effect on their signature gathering. Well, maybe the Indian group didn't have an effect on it, but the measure still failed. Go ahead and tell your Hard Rock knowledge.
No, that's Brad. Okay. We'll move on. Okay, number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
Brad, we've talked a lot about DEI as it relates to Francis Howell, as it relates to Missouri state government, federal state government. Missouri leaders have come out and said that discriminating based on race and gender and kind of white guilt has no place in state government. That's why it's surprising if you heard that the director of a department in Missouri state government traveled out of town to go to a DEI conference, maybe to learn how to implement DEI better, how to let it infiltrate the department's programs. This Week in Missouri Politics, yesterday, Scott Fawn introduced a brand new game to Missouri political observers, and it's a game of Clue, Brad. Do you remember the old board game Clue?
You know what, John? I have to be honest with you. I've never played Clue in my life.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? There are certainly folks like you out there, Brad. And anyway, but most normal human beings who were familiar with the game Clue, it was also a movie, it was also a television show in which you decide which character in the game committed a crime with which weapon. So Scott has it on good authority, as the story goes, that a department head in Missouri state government traveled out of town to attend a DEI conference. And Scott is, over the next couple weeks, he's going to be investigating. He's going to be calling the different departments. They're, doing sunshine requests as necessary to find out which director in Missouri state government actually traveled out of town. And I think the intriguing piece here, Brad, is would this director travel out of town on taxpayer dollars they surely wouldn't let a vendor pay for their junket. I hope not. I'm sure that's not what happened. But my favorite part, Brad, and where my personal bias in this story comes in, is that Scott announced on the show yesterday that the winner of the game gets the first edition run of my book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. When I went to Jeff City last week, I brought Scott and the crew new copies of my book, which have a brand new cover to them. Scott had an original run, and Scott on the show yesterday said that he was going to see if he could get me to sign a copy of that first run book for the winner. And I confirmed with Scott last night that I will indeed sign the first run version of that book for whoever is the first person to figure out which department director attended a DEI seminar, a DEI conference on June 5th of this year. So that's our number 2 piece, Brad.
Okay, but I got a question on that one, though. Okay, remember when the marijuana thing got put in that constitutional amendment, buried in there was a new position, essentially the state DEI person. Who is that? Who is that?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. We might need to crowdsource that, Brad.
Because of the fact that people were going like, okay, where did this come from in the marijuana bill? And essentially what it did was, and I believe it put a salary, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 6 figures. Wasn't it like $130,000, $140,000, something like that?
I think it was more than that. But you're right, Brad, and I never figured out, I never investigated who actually sits in that seat right now. That's a great question.
But maybe that's the clue to Clue. Maybe that the DEI,
I see what you're saying.
The DEI
so it
person
would be somebody then, because the Division of Cannabis Regulation is under DHSS, Brad. Maybe it would be DHSS. You could also text Scott. I mean, and if you want to win the prize, if you won, nobody has won to this point. I should also point out that he's going to do a midweek update today from the state fair, and he is going to confirm with at least 2 directors today, I believe, whether or not they did or did not attend a DEI conference on June 5th.
Does he know the answer to this?
I don't. You know what? So here's the thing. As a shoot, to use a pro wrestling term, as a shoot, I have no idea who it is, and I presume Scott has a pretty good idea, but I'm not certain. And I like to play the rules of the game fairly, and so I don't want to know. I'm bought into the storyline. I'm bought into this narrative.
Can I tell you who it was?
Tell me.
Kurt Barr.
Oh, you know what? He's at the center of a lot of conspiracies too, Brad. Now, if you and I submit Kurt Barr, and it's correct, which is we know that that's not the answer, so let's use a hypothetical. If two people submit at the exact same time, the first person gets, as deemed by Scott, the first person gets a signed copy of my book. The second person wins a hat signed by State Senator and Budget Chairman Lincoln Huff, because Scott had an extra hat laying around the office too. But yeah, Kurt Barr's been at the center of controversies. Maybe we talk about that in a different block, Brad.
Now, the last but most important one.
The number 1
a health issue important to folks in Weldon Spring, or who have lived in Weldon Spring, folks who lived in North County. Brad, I'm sure that some listeners feel like we beat this issue to death with geography and stream flow and ridge talk, but let's mention it again, which is Coldwater Creek, Weldon Spring, and the federal measure known colloquially as RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. It's become a top topic in the state of New Mexico, where a lot of the alleged victims live. And in fact, House Democrats, House Caucus Chairman Pete Aguilar, joined Tuesday with members of the New Mexico congressional delegation to blame House Republicans on the lack of progress on RECA. By the way, the story is brought to us by the Associated Press. And Brad, I would also just point out too that Josh Hawley has pointed the finger at House leadership and wondering why House leadership doesn't make RECA a bigger priority. I bring it up, Brad, not only because of the local issue, but because this is a way for Democrats, at least in one state where there's at least, I believe, one swing district, they're able to take this issue and nationalize it and say, this is why you must continue to vote for Democrats, because we want fairness and justice for these radiation victims.
Well, I think they got a point because you and I have talked about this maybe too much. To me, growing up in that area, I mean, you did as well too, but, I'm much older than you, and there are a lot of people that in my age bracket who are no longer with us, who died of very weird cancers. And I think the whole thing started years ago with that lady who went to her, what was it, McClure High School reunion, I believe it was.
McClure. Yeah, it was not North, but it was McClure.
Right. And they started talking, and they started talking about the fact that, oh yeah, so-and-so died of and it was all weird cancers. It wasn't like I don't want to say your typical, but it was very, very,
Specific, yeah.
1 in 3 million people get this particular type of cancer, stuff like that. And she started documenting, and I guess the interesting thing was then, if I'm not mistaken, you're the expert in this kind of stuff, but I think the state came along and did their investigation. They came back, oh, we don't see any increase in numbers at all. But how can that be? You know what I mean? I don't understand. I think it's because anecdotally, anybody in that area, and me personally, I know of at least 4 people that I know of who lived very close to Coldwater Creek. One of them, who used to swim in Coldwater Creek, and younger than I am, is unfortunately no longer with us. And once again, died of cancer. And I don't know. I mean, Hawley's been good on this. He's been, if you watch some of the YouTube videos, Forbes magazine puts a lot of these congressional and Senate hearings up. Also on YouTube, they put a lot of them in shorts where Hawley just, him and John Kennedy, man. Hawley is sort of like the crazed kind of guy. John Kennedy's like the, hey, I'm going to ask you a couple. By the way, you doing okay today? Everything just fine? Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. And you know what? If you get a little hot in the seat where you think that your seat might be getting a little bit hot, that's just going to be too tough. You know what I mean? That's the way he asks, he asks the questions. I don't know. And matter of fact, it's funny you should talk about this because I don't know if you saw this or not. You're not a Facebook guy, but someone sent me this. I can't remember who it was. And, I think it was the smartest woman in the world. She sent me a little history piece that KDHX, which is the hipster radio station, and Missouri Historical Society do a little mini podcast thing. And because the smartest woman in the world, Hermie, mentioned the fact about and I forgot which cities no longer exist in St. Charles County. It's Hamburg, Toonerville, and Howell. And it's up on my Facebook right now. If I want me to send you the link, I'll send it to you. And it's like about a 2-minute little thing. And it talks about this whole situation, that in 1940, the federal government came in and took those 3 towns, Toonerville, Hamburg, and Howell, which were all essentially along 94. If you go down to the winery, like from the high school south down to Defiance in Augusta, they took all those towns and essentially just booted people out. And that's why, to this day, as you're going along 94, people know where I'm talking about. The waterworks, just before you get to the waterworks, if you go into Defiance, just before you get in the waterworks on the opposite side of 94, there is a cemetery. And I believe that is the Hamburg City Cemetery. That's the only thing left of the city of Hamburg, which used to be in St. Charles County. Now, can I tell you an interesting story?
Oh, yeah.
Another friend of mine, was trying to do some business, and she felt she was being scammed. And she asked the guy where he lived, and he said, Hamburg, Missouri.
Was it an Indian on the phone? Can you tell us that?
No, it was a guy in the state of Missouri, but apparently he wasn't on this side of the state of Missouri, and apparently
so he just picked something out on a list.
Right, he found it somewhere that and I said to her, she says, where is Hamburg, Missouri? I go, well, it's nowhere because it doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
Now, technically, you know how it is. It's sort of, I always find this fascinating. What you look at maps sometimes and you see, like, for example, I had one the other day. I had somebody that lives near this. You know where Josephville is? You ever heard of this one?
I have no idea, no.
Josephsville is a small community, and I think it's technically what Wikipedia would call it, a CDP, a census designated place. It is north of I-70, east of Wentzville. Matter of fact, Josephville, the outer boundary of Josephville is where the General Motors plant is. If you were in the General Motors plant and you walked out the front gate and you headed east, technically you would be in Josephville. But nobody knows that. It's like, where's Josephville?
Wow.
And there's one that comes up on my phone all the time with the National Weather Service. It's like Jake Bend, Missouri. And I'm going, where in the hell is Jake Bend? It says like, there's a tornado warning being issued for Jake Bend, Missouri. I looked it up. It's another thing. It's like an area that doesn't...
I know exactly where it is. It's right underneath Jake's leg. Where the tibia meets the fibula, Brad? That's Jake's Bend, and that's colloquially known as Jake's Leg. Everybody goes there and gets high, though. And
it's south of Metatarsalville. Is that where it is?
It's north of Metatarsalville.
Metatarsalville. Okay, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Stuff that you sent me earlier that I went back and we haven't really touched on. One of them is next break. We have to talk about the Nelly story. Okay, I mean. The more I get into this, the more I think to myself, I think there's a fix on this deal. I think this is...
Ooh, I want to hear your theory.
Well, once again, this is a theory from used to be, once again, long time ago now, but once you've worked in a police department, let's be honest, law enforcement doesn't change that much. Crimes, crime statutes, they do change from year to year. The government changes them around. But basic law enforcement, as far as what people get arrested for, you could get arrested for burglary 100 years ago, and you can get arrested for burglary this afternoon, if you know what I'm saying. It's sort of the same stuff. Okay.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?